Welcome back. You're still watching SA Today. Now, as tributes continue to pour in for legendary musician Johnny Clegg, we're now joined by someone affectionately known as the music guru, Sean Brokensha. Sean, thanks very much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you.
Thank you, my friend. It's always nice to see you.
But sadly, I call you most times when somebody has passed.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things, I guess.
You know, in a way, I'm honored by it because I like to be a person who would be remembered as one who remembered. Yeah.
So Johnny Clegg, we can't do him in a few minutes,
No.
but let's chat as much as we can. I think everybody, no matter what generation, because that's how long he's been part of South African society, will have a Johnny Clegg song.
That's the amazing thing about Johnny Clegg. To condense a lot of content, is that Johnny, everyone saw him as their friend. Whether you'd met Johnny or not, he was just so much part of our life, and he seemed constant. But the things he changed. He was unique, and he kept on evolving with the times. And the music evolved with the various bands, Jaluka, Savuka. It got more politically hard-edged. But he was someone who was totally up on the curve. And he was changing, and he was changing us, because he was taking us on a journey.
All right, so how did this boy, born in Lancashire, in the north, east, west of England, end up being this white Zulu boy?
Well, a lot of it had to do with circumstance, because his parents divorced. His mother was from then Rhodesia, and she was actually of Jewish extraction. Her parents had been immigrants from the war. So there were parts of Johnny, there were so many different parts of him. His father was living in England and stayed in England when they divorced, and the family moved down. His stepfather ended up as a journalist, so he encountered the local culture. So he had, first of all, he had all of those influences. You know, he used to say that he lived in 3 African countries on his on his journey, and he did. He even lived in Israel for a few months. So he comes here and he adopts the life of a normal white South African kid. He was 11, and then just whether it was natural curiosity, whether it was because he hadn't been conditioned for 10 years in apartheid South Africa, but he simply didn't think there was anything wrong with walking up to a black guy with a homemade guitar, because he was fascinated. And what are you doing? And I mean, that in itself was a shocking experience for the guy who was playing the guitar, because white boys don't come up to you.
So there are a number of people, I think, that were influential significantly in his life. Long before he met Sipho Mchunu, who we got to know as Jaluka, Charlie Mzila.
Yes.
Tell us about that and how that set the boat on.
I think what the only thing that made Johnny's first little voyage possible was what he was. He was humble, and he was willing to learn. So Charlie took him on almost like a son, and he taught him the ways of the maskandi. And that's not just the instruments, not how to make your own guitar, but it's also, the maskandi song is your calling card. It's the story of your life. So you will be playing that guitar, and you'll be singing a long song, one song, a song of a lifetime, saying, I am Johannes, I come from Ladysmith, I've got 2 cows, I work at Crown Mines, I'm looking for a wife. And so as your life develops, so the song of the maskandi develops. And so that is what Charlie instilled in him. His early influences as well were also in dance. Now, how's this for courage for a young boy? He took himself off down to the hostel, and he wanted to learn dancing and stick fighting. And he was prepared to take the knocks.
In the middle of great political upheaval. He just says, I'm going to go do this.
And indeed, I know grown-ups would not dare to do it. But he's just had this insatiable curiosity for people. And he struggled with his own identity to begin with. But then he got to a point where he realized that we all have a shared identity. And suddenly a light bulb went off in his heart and in his mind. And he started telling us that.
We'll talk about his music just now, but I'm also fascinated by his thirst for knowledge of people, because anthropology became this thing, studying Africa and people became this thing, and I think that played in his music as well. Yeah,
that definitely drove him. Their first album as Jaluka, Universal Men, was all about the trials and tribulations of the migrant workers. And so it was a story that he'd encountered these people in the hostels, and it's the story that he wanted to tell their stories. And that's where it started. And this interest in people You know, he would never flag. He would go. He was just the most amazing man to encounter, because he genuinely was interested in you in a humble way, irrespective of who you were. And that grew more and more, because he just realized that people need people. And he was the guy who had to tell white South Africa that.
So there's so much music, and I think everybody's got their song or a few songs that they remember. I remember when I lived in England for a few years, every time I missed home, I would go to him for some reason. I think he brought me home much more than anybody else. But there was one song for you that changed your life profoundly.
Yes, indeed.
And that was the song Africa. Let's listen to it a little bit. So, for some people it was just a popular tune, but it was profound for you. Give us the backstory about this song.
It starts with a slightly jaded high school boy who is faced with the prospect of double history on a Thursday afternoon and learning all about the Great Trek, as interpreted by the teachers of the day. And there was the rumor that there was a free concert at the Varsity. So me and my friend, we stole his mother's car and we played truant. And we arrived at Natal University, and I wasn't quite prepared for what I found. You know, I thought I was cool. I thought I was going to pretend to be a student and I was going to meet girls.
Yeah.
But I was wearing my school pants and my school shoes and a Hawaii shirt. I mean, who was I kidding? But the fellow audience members were 23 cleaning staff and a few nervous professors. And they weren't even called Jaluka. They were still called Johnny and Zipu. And that was because they were heavily restricted. They weren't allowed to perform at public venues because of the Group Areas Act. So that's why all of the secrecy and all the kind of stuck in the bowels of the university. I arrived there just wanting to have a job. At the moment he started playing this song, something just exploded in me. My head just realized that it was in the wrong place. In fact, my head was only seeing a tiny little piece of the sky. And this man was my way to actually find out who I was. I didn't know, of course, when you're 16 and 17, you can't put that into language.
And seeing a black man with a white man singing together.
Even that was shocking. But the song just made me think of things I really loved about this country that I took for granted. You know, the feel of the wind, the taste of the water, the smile of the people, things I just thought, well, were they normal? And I realized that they were special. And I realized that they were African, and they spoke to me because I was African.
We're running out of time, sadly, and I'm just trying to find a way, perhaps, to put it all together. How do we do that?
I heard something that many fantastic tributes have poured in, obviously. And I heard something that Vusi Mashlasela said yesterday that really said it for me completely. He said that Johnny taught us that, that life is a language. And that is totally true. I mean, it's something that flowed in between us, and Johnny saw that. Johnny was our boatman. Wow.
Yeah, many people sad and remembering. I'm smiling though, because his music will stay with us. He may not be here in body, but I think his spirit will live with us.
Well, the indelible mark he's left. You know, in 100 years or so, when they're talking about great South Africans, and we're lucky to have seen a generation of exceptional South Africans. Mandela, Desmond Tutu, people like that. Johnny Clegg will be mentioned when people sit around that fire.
He could see into the future somehow.
And he was so visionary. I mean, if you listen to the early stuff, and people listen to the early Johnny Clegg stuff, the early albums, they are fantastic, and they're overlooked. But they show a visionary. You know, in his first album, he says, "Hand in hand, we'll walk out the darkness." You know, he saw that in the late 70s.
Why do you think he could and others couldn't? Was it because he immersed himself in all of people's lives genuinely and sincerely and completely?
I think it was a confluence of many things. Obviously who he was, his intelligence, his humility, his curiosity, but also because he had no hang-ups. He arrived here with a bright, fresh mind. It's a wonderful example to us all. When you arrive here with an untainted mind and you see this country, what do? Do you start suspecting people because they're a different shade, or do you start loving it with its people?
When did South Africans embrace this project? Because it was at a time where it was difficult, I guess, for both sides to say, but hang on, who's this white guy? And then black people saying, why is he singing with a
Well, we embraced it in different stages. The first people to embrace Johnny Clegg was the migrant workers.
Yeah.
Because they saw what he was doing. They saw the integrity of this young man. It took young white South Africans. It didn't take us very much longer after that, especially when the albums started coming out and these scandalous concerts started happening. And it was what we needed to hear, because most of us didn't even know that we had to ask questions, let alone what questions we had to ask. And I think that started a fire. And then remember that a lot of people left South Africa. A lot of white people left South Africa at that stage, and they went to other places in the world. And this was, as you mentioned about your memory of Africa, this was one bond. Juluka was a bond to home. And so that spread that in Europe as well.
Why do you think that he didn't get the international recognition that he deserved? People knew him around the world.
He did.
But did you? I mean, he didn't chart as well.
Well, maybe he didn't chart in the UK and the US. But he is, at one point, he was the biggest selling artist in French history.
In France, okay,
in
so
Belgium,
there were some countries,
Belgium, in Switzerland, massive. The awards that he's been given over the years, the numerous awards, his recognition as a musical pioneer, as what he did with the sound of the guitar, introducing Africa to Western guitar in a way that we could understand, we could all understand and share in it.
Right.
And I think there's a lot more to come.
Yeah.
There's a lot
so his music was in Rain Man as well?
Yeah, well, so many movies. I mean, there are so many movies that you'll find Johnny Clegg music in. And he might have only got to, I think, as high as 44 on the charts in the UK. But the honours, the Grammy nominations, the OBE, things like that, they speak volumes.
All right, so big partnerships, Sipho Mchunu and Dudu Zulu.
Yeah, and that actually marked a difference between Juluka and Savuka, because Dudu was a dancer first and foremost. Sipho was a musician, and almost like an older brother to him. If you look at the dynamic between the two guys, he was slightly older than him, and he taught him the ropes. And the reason they were drawn together is they were both young men, mostly in the company of grown men, minors. And so that's what brought them together. But the mentor was Sipho in that regard. And Dudu marked a change from Juluka, because Sipho decided he wanted to be a farmer. And so he went back to the farm in Natal. And Johnny took Juluka internationally by turning it into Savuka and making it more dance-oriented, slicker, more of a concert experience. But he never sacrificed on the stories. He never, in fact, his level of activism increased with Savuka. He started releasing songs like Asimbonanga, which is not a gentle, suggestive nudge like Let's Walk in the Sunshine. It is, where is he? We have not seen him. Where are you keeping Mandela? And what did you do to Victoria Mxenge? And that was totally.
And then when Dudu Zulu got shot, that must have been a difficult period for him. What was the story of Johnny Clegg after that?
Johnny Clegg, he believed in an old Zulu saying, which I can't remember the original, but it basically is that when the ox is in yoke, even the old ox will keep on pulling. That if you give yourself to a cause, you must keep going, irrespective of what tragedy will happen, death will happen, circumstances will change, but you stay fixed on that road and that course. And that was, he had a missionary zeal, although he was not a religious man. He had this missionary vision, as we mentioned before.
All right, Sean, we're going to have to leave it there. I wish we had so much more time to talk about and celebrate this incredible life, but his music will live on. Thanks so much indeed for helping us remember him. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back at the top of the hour, we'll have more for you as we start to tell your story.